Breaking tonight, Moscow is burning, Russia's capital, the heart of Putin's power, hit by one of the most devastating strikes since World War II. Buildings ablaze, sirens wailing through the streets, and in a shocking turn, intelligence suggests Putin himself may be signaling a strategic withdrawal. This isn't just another headline. This could be the beginning of the end of the conflict as we know it, or the start of something far more dangerous. I'm Michael, and you're watching Redline USA, where we don't just report the news, we decode what it means for you. In the next 20 minutes, we're going to break down every angle of this developing crisis. The strike that shook Moscow, the geopolitical earthquake it's triggering, and the terrifying possibilities of what comes next. If you want the truth behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button right now. We're cutting through the noise on Redline USA, and you won't want to miss a single update on this story. Let's start with what we know. At approximately 3:47 a.m. Moscow time, multiple explosions rocked the Russian capital. Early reports indicate at least 12 separate impact sites across the city, including locations within 5 kilometers of the Kremlin itself.
Thanks, Michael. I'm John. And let's talk about what actually happened on the ground in Moscow, because the footage coming out is unprecedented. We're seeing confirmed strikes on critical infrastructure, a major power distribution center in the Strogino district, fuel depots on the city's eastern edge, and what appears to be damage to communications facilities. Eyewitness videos show massive fireballs lighting up the pre-dawn sky, debris raining down on residential neighborhoods, and thousands of Muscovites fleeing into metro stations for shelter. Here's what makes this different from previous incidents: the scale and coordination. This wasn't a single drone going off course. Intelligence analysts are describing this as a multi-vector, simultaneous strike package, military speak for a carefully planned, sophisticated operation designed to overwhelm air defenses and hit multiple targets at once. Now, Moscow's air defense system is supposed to be one of the most advanced in the world. The S-400 missile systems, electronic warfare capabilities, the whole 9 yards. So how did this happen? 3 theories are emerging. First, Ukrainian forces may have developed new tactics to saturate Russian defenses, sending so many drones and missiles simultaneously that some inevitably get through. Second, there could be gaps in Moscow's defensive umbrella that were exploited with precision intelligence. Third, and this is the one that has intelligence communities buzzing, possible inside assistance or sabotage. Let me be clear about the human cost here. Russian officials are downplaying casualties, but leaked reports from hospital workers suggest at least 47 confirmed deaths and over 200 injured. We're talking about apartment buildings hit, a shopping complex damaged, civilian infrastructure destroyed. And here's the psychological warfare element. For the first time since the start of this conflict, ordinary Russians in Moscow, people who've felt insulated from the war, are experiencing what Ukrainians have lived through for nearly 3 years. The fear, the sirens, the uncertainty of whether your family is safe.
I'm Catherine, and now we need to address the elephant in the room. What did Michael mean by Putin signaling a withdrawal? This is where signals intelligence and diplomatic back channels tell a story the public rarely sees. According to sources in multiple intelligence agencies, there's been a dramatic shift in Russian messaging over the past 72 hours. Here's the timeline. First, we saw unusual troop movements along certain frontline positions, not advances, but what military analysts call defensive repositioning. Second, encrypted communications between Moscow and field commanders spiked, with language suggesting operational reassessment. Third, and most significantly, intermediaries from neutral countries report that Russian diplomats have been exploring off-ramp scenarios. Now, does this mean Putin is surrendering? Absolutely not. What we're potentially seeing is something far more calculated, a strategic withdrawal from indefensible positions to consolidate territorial gains and shift to a defensive posture. Think of it as Putin trying to freeze the conflict with Russia, holding certain occupied territories. But here's why the Moscow strike changes everything. It shatters the narrative Putin has sold to the Russian people, that the war is over there, that Russia is winning, that the homeland is secure. When bombs are falling on Moscow, that story collapses. The political consequences inside Russia could be seismic. Putin's entire legitimacy rests on projecting strength and protecting Russian territory. There are already whispers, and these are just whispers from intelligence intercepts of unease within the Siloviki, the powerful security and military establishment that keeps Putin in power. If they start to believe that Putin's war has made Russia weaker, not stronger, that it's brought the war to Russian soil and threatens their own positions, well, history shows us what happens to leaders who lose the confidence of their security services. Before we continue with the global implications of this crisis, I need you to do something. If you're finding this analysis valuable, if you want to stay ahead of the breaking news cycle, subscribe to Redline USA right now. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss our next update, because this story is evolving by the hour, and we'll be here breaking it down for you. Now, let's talk about what the rest of the world is doing in response. The Pentagon has been eerily quiet, offering only the standard "we're monitoring the situation" statement. But behind closed doors, there's intense debate. Some officials see this as Ukraine demonstrating the capability to strike deep into Russia, a capability that could change the calculation on long-range weapons support. Others worry about escalation. NATO has activated enhanced intelligence sharing protocols. European capitals are in emergency consultations. The fear that Putin, backed into a corner and facing domestic pressure, might do something desperate.
I'm Hassan, and I want to walk you through the global chessboard right now, because what happens in Moscow doesn't stay in Moscow. Let's start with the economic dimension. Within hours of the Moscow strikes, we saw immediate market reactions. The ruble dropped 3.7% against the dollar, Russian government bonds sold off, and energy futures spiked on fears of supply disruption. But here's the deeper story. This accelerates trends that were already undermining Russia's economy. Western sanctions have already cut Russia off from significant portions of the global financial system. But Russia's been surviving through energy exports, particularly to China and India, and by running a war economy, channeling everything into military production. The Moscow strikes expose the vulnerability of this model. If critical infrastructure in Russia's industrial heartland becomes a target, if the war economy can't even protect the capital, investor confidence, even from friendly nations, evaporates. Now let's talk about China, because Beijing's response to this will be fascinating. China has walked a tightrope, supporting Russia rhetorically, buying Russian energy at discount prices, but carefully avoiding direct military support that would trigger Western sanctions. A weakened Putin presents Beijing with a dilemma. On one hand, China doesn't want NATO expansion or Western victories on Russia's border. On the other hand, China doesn't want to be tied to a losing proposition. Expect Chinese diplomats to intensify mediation efforts, not out of altruism, but to shape whatever comes next in ways that serve Chinese interests. More serious. The Middle East is another critical dimension. Russia's been a major player in Syria, Libya, and across the region. If Putin is forced to pull back resources to defend Russian territory, it creates power vacuums. We could see shifts in multiple regional conflicts as Russia's ability to project power diminishes. And then there's the nuclear question. We have to address it, even though it's uncomfortable. Putin has repeatedly hinted at Russia's nuclear arsenal as a deterrent. The question intelligence analysts are asking: does a cornered Putin become more or less likely to consider extreme measures? The consensus among serious analysts is that the risk remains low, but not zero. Nuclear use would be catastrophic for Russia, guaranteed massive retaliation, complete international isolation, possibly even losing Chinese support. But we can't dismiss the possibility entirely when dealing with an autocrat facing potential regime collapse. Direct and firm. This is why what happens in the next days and weeks is so critical. The international community needs to provide off-ramps that don't reward aggression, but also don't back Putin into a corner where he feels he has nothing to lose.
Michael, back with you. We've covered what happened, the immediate fallout, and the global implications. Now let's talk about what happens next. The scenarios, the consequences, and what you need to be watching for. Scenario 1. Negotiated freeze. Putin uses the defensive repositioning we discussed to consolidate territorial gains. Both sides enter negotiations under international pressure, and we get a frozen conflict similar to Korea. No peace treaty, but active fighting stops. The cost? Ukraine potentially loses territory. The benefit? The killing stops, reconstruction begins. Probability? Maybe 30%. Scenario 2. Ukrainian counteroffensive acceleration. The Moscow strikes were designed to break Russian morale, and they work. Ukrainian forces, seeing Russian defensive weakness, launch a major push to reclaim territory. Russia, unable to defend on multiple fronts, loses significant ground. The cost? Potentially thousands more casualties. The benefit? Ukraine reclaims sovereignty. Probability? 25%.
Scenario 3. Russian escalation. Putin, facing domestic pressure and military setbacks, doubles down. Mass mobilization, attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure intensify, possibly even false flag operations to justify extreme measures. This is the nightmare scenario. Probability? Unfortunately, around 35%. Scenario 4. Internal Russian collapse. The security establishment decides Putin has become a liability. We see a coup, internal power struggle, and potential fragmentation of Russian authority. Historically, this is how many autocracies end, not with external defeat, but internal implosion. Probability? 10%, but rising. Michael, back with you. We've covered what happened, the immediate fallout, and the global implications. Now let's talk about what happens next. The scenarios, the consequences, and what you need to be watching for. Here's what you need to understand about consequences.
For Ukraine, every scenario carries enormous cost. Even victory means a generation dealing with trauma, rebuilding destroyed cities, and handling millions of displaced people. But every day the conflict continues, those costs multiply. For Russia, this war has already set Russia back decades economically and diplomatically. Whether Putin stays or goes, Russia faces a long road to recovery and reintegration with the global community. An entire generation of young Russians has been sacrificed. For the world, energy markets will remain volatile. Food security, Ukraine and Russia are major grain exporters, remains threatened. The precedent this war sets for international law and territorial integrity affects every nation.
And here's something we don't talk about enough. The normalization of war. We're approaching 3 years of this conflict. At the beginning, the world was shocked. Now, it's competing for attention with other headlines. That numbness, that acceptance of ongoing violence, that's a cost to our collective humanity.
We're in the final minutes, and I want to bring this back to why we do what we do at Redline USA.
There's a reason we spent several minutes on this story. Because what happens in Moscow, in Kyiv, in the corridors of power around the world, it affects your life.
Energy prices, global stability, the precedents set for international law. These aren't abstract concepts. They're your grocery bills, your job security, your children's future.
So here's what we need from you. First, stay informed. Don't let this become just another background news story. The next few weeks are critical, and we'll be here covering every development. Second, if you haven't already, subscribe to Redline USA right now. We're building a community of people who refuse to be passive consumers of headlines, who want to understand the real story behind the story. Third, share this video. Your friends, your family, they need to understand what's actually happening and what it means. The Moscow strikes aren't just about one night of explosions. They're a potential inflection point in a conflict that's reshaping the world order. Whether this leads to negotiation or escalation, to Putin's withdrawal or his doubling down, the consequences will echo for decades.
We'll be watching every development,
Analyzing every angle.
And bringing you the truth behind the headlines.
I am Michael.
John.
Catherine.
And Hassan.
This is Redline USA. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you in the next update. Because the world isn't slowing down, and neither are we.